That's a lot of our introductory information here. And our second module is some basics about soil invertebrates and urban soils. So just a refresher, invertebrates are this group of animals that don't have a backbone. Some are entirely soft-bodied, like slugs. Some have exoskeletons or shells. And invertebrates are an extremely diverse group of animals. 70% of described species are invertebrates. And just focusing in on animal species, that number jumps up to 95% of the described animal species are invertebrates, with insects as the largest group by far. And of all these insects, it's estimated that just roughly 2% are pests, from a human perspective, causing any kind of economic damage to our interests or economic activities. With all this invertebrate and insect diversity, it's pretty clear that the fate of the world's insects is inseparable from our own. Focusing in on some of the connections and roles for today are how they're part of nutrient cycling and decomposition, managing pest populations, turning plants into food for other animals, helping plants reproduce. We'll be looking at a lot of that in more detail here coming up. And I don't know if any of you would recognize this as a firefly. This is the larval stage of a firefly, which is a beetle. And the point I want to make here is just begin the connection that many of the insects we see above ground, flying around, crawling around as adults, they also have a part of their life cycle that is in the soil, often as eggs, larvae, and their pupal stages. Some examples of those are fireflies, ground nesting bees, and also some beetle species. A few slides here, though, to highlight some recent studies showing the status of these animals. So many of them are in decline. That means the number of individuals or the number of species are decreasing. This is a quite chilling and telling study at nature reserves in Germany. Over a roughly 30-year period, there was a 76% decline in insect biomass measured. This was in nature reserves where you would expect that declines would be at their least. And so if it was this severe in nature preserves, what could it be like elsewhere? Pollinators are also a group that's in decline. It's estimated that roughly 40% of invertebrate pollinator species, like the bumblebee pictured here, are at risk of extinction in coming years. And as we'll see, these native bees, many of them live in the soil for part of their life. And a beetle example here, this is a subspecies of a tiger beetle that is a predator on the soil surface. And this is another group that's been estimated to be sufficiently rare to be considered threatened or endangered. And really focusing in on soil invertebrates, almost anywhere that invertebrates have been studied, we're seeing these patterns of decline. And if we ask that same question specifically about soil invertebrates, we find that our scientific and ecological understanding is still pretty simple and basic. This quote is from a recent review paper that looked at trends in invertebrate populations globally, where the author said, soil invertebrates and the soil-dwelling larval stages of flying insects represent a major biodiversity pool in terrestrial ecosystems, yet they have been woefully neglected in many biodiversity databases and assessments, as well as in conservation actions and policies. And so, given that a major fraction of invertebrates live below the ground and considering their significant functional role, the authors here make the call to action that biodiversity monitoring urgently needs to include soil organisms and functions. So just that to round out a bit about what we do and so much that we don't know about the status of these important animals. Next, I'm going to switch to a short introductory section on soil. Soil, the more I learn about it, the more I study. It was one of the real light bulb classes for me as an undergraduate student, was how magnificent and interesting and how much there was to know about soil. If we look at it from a functional perspective, for it's habitat for plants, microbes, and animals. It's where water supply regulation and filtration happens in terrestrial systems. It's also where the recycling and storage of organic matter, that is carbon, takes place. And then from a very human perspective, it's where we live and build things. If we're in a home, a building, a road, or just out on the ground itself, there is soil supporting us from below. I also want to make this distinction here on a continuum between soil and not soil. So if we think of soil as a system, it's alive, it's mineral, it's intact, it's been there for some time in a relatively undisturbed state. There are minerals of different sizes and composition. There are living and dead plants and animals. You see it has structure to it. There are these horizons. And like I said, it's intact and it's in place. If soil is dug or excavated and then no longer intact or in place, but instead in a pile, I think of that as soil material. It's disturbed, removed, and isolated. It's less alive. And then going to the far end here on the right, the things we might sweep up on the floor and put in a dustpan, that is dirt or debris. It's not soil, it's not alive. Soil science has these basic ways to characterize and classify soils, physical characteristics such as texture, aggregate stability, and density. Also, chemical aspects like pH, cation exchange capacity, fertility, and other nutrients. And increasingly, there's more attention and understanding about the biological characteristics of soil. And this can be measured in a way through respiration, as well as microbial diversity and abundance. And then there are other characteristics like soil color, the age of soils, and soil orders that are used. I have our first open question here. We'd like for you to think about this and put your response in the chat. And hopefully the chat settings allow you to do that. We're gonna test this here, please. So at your farm or yard or wherever it is that you're caring for soil, what is the soil type? And actually the soil series, if you happen to know that. Or if you prefer, you could comment on what the soil texture is like. Is it mostly sand particles, clay particles, silt particles, or an evenish mixture of those, which are loam? Again, you can access the chat, and I can't see very well, so hopefully Kelly or Stephanie may be able to check the controls and enable the chat for folks. Just give everyone a moment here. Yeah, and if that's not going to work, then you can use Q&A.
The chat should be ready.
Okay.
I don't see any responses though, so maybe
Okay.
being shy. Oops, there's one. Sandy Loam.
All right, very good.
Here we go. They're coming in now.
Okay, super. And yes, I see the comment there in the Q&A chat is disabled. So thank you for noting that, and I think that's resolved now. Sorry about that. All right, great to see all of these coming in. Some about texture, those different size soil particles. And then names like cordyceps or sassafras that are mentioned. Those are series. And so we have these orders. That's a higher level of classification. And then at a very local scale, soils are classified at the level of series, and they'll have a name often after a place location that's nearby. And then you can look up in soil surveys and find much more information about the soil once you know what the series is there. See a question, can you explain the difference between silt and loam? Yeah, silt is this kind of mid-sized mineral soil particle between sand, which is the larger category of particle sizes, and clay, which is the smallest size category. And loam is a combination of those three. All right, and then I see this term latticol. That's an example of one of those soil orders. Those will end in the suffix sol, sol. All right, great. Thanks everyone for chiming in there in the chat. Continuing with soil formation or pedogenesis, there's classically been 5 factors that influence soil formation: the original parent material, the organisms, plants and animals, and microorganisms that act on that parent material, climate, topography, and time. However, increasingly, scientists are thinking of this as 6 different factors in soil formation, with the 6th being human influence here. And the photos here show kind of how those human altered landscapes are in the top row, and then the characteristics of different soil profiles accordingly. There are also new soil orders, these classification groups, which again, you can identify and order by that suffix of SOL. So anthrosols, these are human altered soils over timeframes of thousands to hundreds of years. And then there are these other terms, kind of these adjectives. Have they been modified because humans are doing water management there, because they have livestock or are stockpiling manure there? Is it a place where there's been cultivation or gardening? And then another term that's sometimes used is technosols, and these typically actually contain artifacts, some other type of material that's human derived. Urbic is urban or residential. There's some that may have pavement or other types of stones and things that humans have moved. Even the soils we're putting on roofs have their own category called isolatic. And also when we're kind of creating new material through the spoils from mine or other rubble that we pile up, that's a kind of technosol as well. Here are just a few more examples. That acrenic was a paving. Again, past cultures or societies may have become embedded in soil with their pavements that way. And like I mentioned, rooftop soils are this other new category that's defined as labeled an isolatic technosol. So getting into our special animals here, soil invertebrates in urban soils. These animal communities can actually be quite diverse in urban soils. The communities are influenced by the physical and chemical characteristics, as well as by past and present land uses. They're of course sensitive to things like physical disturbance, heavy metal contamination, other contamination like pesticides, irrigation, fertilization, and also influenced by the kind of plant community that's growing in that soil. This is really an emerging area of research, but there is this longer list of all the possible influences on-soil life that are specific or unique to urban soils here. I'm just highlighting them here, and the following presentations will go into some of these with a bit more detail. In the end, though, soil is amazingly full of life. I kind of had that pie chart earlier on that highlighted how diverse invertebrates are. And if we just focus in on these smaller invertebrate animals that are in the soil, about 25% of all known living organisms are animals that live in the soil. Excuse me, animals or microbes that live in the soil. For the most part today, we're going to talk about the animals, the invertebrate animals that we can see without too much magnification. But here's where I'm going to take the time to introduce a few of the very small ones that do require magnification. The pyramid here on the left is just for illustration. It's not to scale, but it makes sense. It's logical. The bottom of that pyramid, the most abundant in terms of the number of individual organisms are these microbes, the bacteria, the actinomycetes and fungi. As you go up, you get into larger body types, and then you'll have kind of a fewer number of those for a given volume of soil. And the photos show some of these microfauna, the smaller animals of tardigrades, rotifers, nematodes, and then a non-animal group, the protozoans. If you've spent any time learning or working in soil health, you're quite aware of the importance of fungi and bacteria. Again, Xerces here today, our focus is on the invertebrates, but I do just want to highlight these two really relevant groups. Bacteria are the most abundant soil organism in terms of biomass. They typically feed on carbon, they contribute to decomposition, and in turn, they're part of food webs where they're eaten by the micro and mesofauna, these real tiny and small animals. And bacteria, some groups are able to transform atmospheric nitrogen in its elemental form to other compounds that are available to plants. And then fungi, they're also very abundant in soil. They decompose plant residue, they regulate pathogens, they multiply. I see your hand, Kelly. Is that 5 minutes? Perfect, thank you. They regulate pathogens, and they also multiply the capacity of roots to absorb water, nutrients, as well as to tolerate drought. The image here is a simplified soil food web. And starting with this green triangle in the lower left, this is the arrows here as well. It's showing how energy and nutrients, the energy is mostly in the form of carbon here, how that's moving through these animal networks. And so we begin with the organic residues. These are the dead or living little pieces of plants or animals. I should mention plants are not represented in this food web. It's that just zeroing in on once they're dead and they have dropped parts of them and they have these organic residues. So then if we add bacteria here, these are the groups circled in kind of an orange color. You can see there's a transfer. They're able to consume and break down the organic residues and begin to move that energy and nutrients out into the food web. And then additionally, sorry, I just need fungi here. Looking at the blue rectangles where they connect with the organic residues, the fungi are really what then become food for these groups like springtails, like mites, and other real smaller soil invertebrates here. And then we get to the top layer. These are all the predators, not all the predators. These are apex predators in this soil food web here, a few of them as examples. And this, if you think of a more mammalian or vertebrate terrestrial food web, these are things like wolves here. So just again, giving a little nod to fungi and bacteria and how those organisms tie into the bigger picture here. I showed this illustration before, but I want to specifically call it out as ode to Jim Nardi, who's a retired professor from the University of Illinois, and generously contributed illustrations from his book called The Life in Soil for us to use as part of our curriculum here. We don't live in soil as humans. It can be really hard to observe soil without disturbing it. And since so many of these animals like to be in the dark, they, as soon as you dig and disturb, they run, they try to move and hide. So an illustration like this really captures all the different things that are happening here in soil. My final slide for this module is to introduce not only the diversity of life, but all the different roles that soil animals play. They have a huge influence on life above ground and things that we and all the other life depend on, like cycling nutrients, building soil structure, improving water infiltration and storage, enhancing plant productivity. Again, by the way, they increase things like aeration, water infiltration and storage, the nutrient cycling, and then they're also important in regulating climate through carbon, nitrogen, and water cycles. They balance populations of other organisms. Pollinators are a soil animal for parts of their life cycle, and important food sources for other wildlife.